Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Jetpack Components introduced a new way of navigation in XML. The same follows in Jetpack Compose as well. So, if you're wondering that how do we do navigation in Jetpack Compose, stay until the end of this video, where we will discover exactly that. Starting with the video, as usual, I have an empty project. So the very first thing I'd like to do is actually create different screens so that I can navigate between them. They will be very simple screens, so let's quickly do that first. Here, if you notice, I have created three fairly simple screens, nothing special. A home screen, a favorite screen, and a settings screen. All of them just contains a column with a text view at the center. Now comes the main topic of this video, navigation. How do we navigate between these screens? The very first thing you'd want to do is to actually go ahead and add the project dependency for navigation. So let's quickly do that. Here you see that we have added navigation dependency and synced up the project. So let's first start with the bottom navigation because that is the most common use case of navigation. The very first thing we need to do for the bottom bar is to actually create the bottom items, which will contain the title for the item in the bottom bar, its icon, and also the screen route name, which will denote the unique route to be followed by navigation. So let's quickly do that as well. Here I have added a bottom nav item sealed class that is taking in the title, icon and screen route name, which I have already mentioned that screen route name would be the unique name that the navigation library will use to uniquely identify each different route. So since it is a sealed class, we can create all the screens items here itself. So let's quickly do that as well. Now here I have added three objects which are all of the bottom nav item type. That means the home bottom nav item is having the title of home, an icon of home, and also the screen route name of home. Same goes for the other items as well. Now remember that you can always use different names for different routes. I personally prefer to use the same name for the screen route. It makes development much more easier. Now let's first create the bottom bar. Starting with the bottom bar composable, we have a list of items that we would like to show in the bottom bar. That is home, favorites, and the settings. After that, I have added a bottom navigation composable, which is provided by the navigation library itself. If we have a look at it, we'll see that it is just a simple row wrapped around a surface. So here you can see that it is just a simple row and that is wrapped around a surface. Now a surface is nothing but a simple composable that, as the name suggests, provides a surface for the user interaction. Wrapping a composable with a surface means that now the user can perform click, drag, or any kind of other actions on the composable. In this case, the row. Here we add a bottom navigation item for each item in the list. That was the home, settings, and the favorites. So for each item, we add a bottom navigation item. Bottom navigation item is also provided by the navigation library itself. Right, so let's place this bottom bar on the screen and let's see how this looks. Here I have added a bottom bar, but notice that I have used a scaffold for this. Well, scaffold is a material component that allows us to place various different components in a common pattern, such as a bottom bar, top bar, or fab buttons. We'll see the use of scaffold much more as we progress through this series. Anyways, the bottom bar is looking as it should. Perfect. So now that we have created the bottom bar, we also need to hook it up with the functionality to navigate between different screens. If you remember, we used a nav host for that in XML as well. That nav host was the component that held the screens, and when hooked up with the bottom bar, it could change screens based on the item. So similar to XML, we are going to do the same in Compose as well. Let's create a nav host for our screens to be hosted. Here you can see that I have added a new navigation component that is taking a nav host controller as a parameter. Inside it is creating a nav host which takes that nav controller and a starting destination. So a nav controller is a component that takes care of the navigation for us. When we specify that we need to navigate to a different screen, it is that nav controller which takes care of navigating to the different screen, maintaining backstack, and much more. Now let's add the different screens into the nav host. So you can see that we have added all the screens inside the nav host. This will create a navigation graph with all the screens. So we create a composable with the screen route, and when the screen route navigation happens, we show the respective screen. For example, when we navigate to the home screen route, nav controller knows that it needs to show the home screen. With this, we have created our nav controller. Now let's place it onto the screen. Here we place a navigation component in the main screen, and for the nav controller we are passing the remember nav controller object. Remember nav controller is a savable object so that it can save the navigation backstack across the config changes as well. In the Ultimate Guide to States Lifecycle and View Models video, we learned that we can use remember savable when we want to persist the state across config changes. By the way, if you'd want to learn more about that, I'll have a link to that video in the description box below. Check that out as well. So if I go ahead and open the Remember Nav controller, you'll see that we saved the navigator so that the current navigation is saved across config changes. If we do not do that and change the config of the view, we'll see that the nav controller will be initialized again and we'll be seeing the start screen once again. We obviously do not want that. We want the user to stay at the same screen when the config changes. That's why we use Remember Nav controller for the same. So now if we run the app, we'll see that we are at the home screen. That is because it is the starting destination in the nav host, but nothing happens when we click on the different bottom bar items. To do that, we need to navigate to the correct screen on bottom bar click. So let's do that as well. So here we add the single instance of the nav controller so that we can hook the bottom bar with the navigation. We pass this instance to both bottom bar and the nav host. Moving on to the bottom bar, you see that I have added the nav host controller as a parameter in the bottom bar composable as well. Now we'll be using this nav host controller to handle all the bottom bar item clicks. Now let's get the backstack and also the current route of the nav controller. So here I have added the backstack entry. It is no secret that the Jetpack navigation maintains a backstack. That means it has a stack and all the new navigation gets added on top of that stack. So for example, I have a screen A, then I open screen B from A. So B will be added on top of A. This is called the backstack, which is based on the launch mode. Anyway, so the nav controller dot current entry as state returns the same backstack entry as a state. So in here, according to the docs itself, when the given nav controller changes the backstack due to a nav controller dot navigate or nav controller dot pop backstack, this will trigger a recompose and return the top entry on the backstack. So that means we get the backstack which is currently at the top, or in most simple words, we get the screen which is at the top. Now we take the route name from this backstack entry to get the current route. So here we are simply getting the route name from the current backstack entry. Moving ahead, to denote if the bottom nav item is selected or not, we add current route is equals to item.screen.route. So if the unique name for that item is equals to the current route, then obviously it would be the selected route, isn't it? Here in the bottom nav item, I have added a condition check that if the current route is equal to the current item's screen route, then it will be marked as selected, otherwise not. So if you notice at the start, the starting destination for the nav graph would be the home screen. So the current route will be the home screen route. Anyways, now let's finally add the functionality to actually navigate to different screens on the onClick method. Now nav controller has a navigate method which takes in the screen route and navigates to the respective screens. On the right you'll see exactly that happening. We have multiple navigation options with the navigate method as well. For example, the navigate method will run a new instance of the screen every time we navigate to the respective screen. So we had a mode for this in XML as well called launch single top mode. Similarly, we can pass the single top option in the navigation options as well. With that added, now only single instance of the screen will be launched once we navigate to the respective screen. Along with the launch mode, we also have the pop-up to method which pops up to the destination to avoid large stacks. Let's add that first. Here, what we are doing is basically that we found the starting destination of the graph. In our case, that would be the home screen. So it gets the start destination, and if that is not null, it sets the pop-up to method for the start destination. In simple words, this would mean that pressing the back arrow button from any destination would pop the entire backstack to home screen. We also have set the save state to true. That means that when popping up or going back, it would actually store the save state. Along with that, we have something called as restore state, which is another navigation option. Now, this attribute determines whether this navigation action should restore any state previously saved by save state or the pop-up to save state attribute. So as expected, everything is working fine now. So now let's take a look at how we would have multiple nav graphs inside of the same project like we used to have in XML. In XML, if you remember, we could have multiple nav graphs such as a different nav graph for the auth module and a different nav graph for the main navigation of the project. So for that, let's create a detailed screen for the home page and a language selection screen for the settings page. So now I have created two more screens. One is the language screen, which simply contains a column along with some text, and same is the detail screen, which also contains a column along with some text. Also notice that I have changed the home screen and added a button at the center. Similarly, I have also changed the settings screen to add a button at the center. If I go ahead and show you the app, you'll see that on the home screen, you'll find a go to detail screen button, and on the settings screen, you'll find a go to language screen button. Now, obviously on clicking, nothing will happen on these buttons because we haven't hooked up these screens with the navigation yet. Right. So with all the screens made, let's now create different nav graphs for the home screen and also the settings screen. For the home screen, I have created a package navigation in which I will be having the nav graph for the home screen. So as you can see that I am having this graph and I want the home screen to be shown here. I would want to shift the home screen to this nav graph because now our main navigation controller will use the entire nav graph to navigate. So in this nav graph, since we want the home screen to be the starting screen, that's why we shift the home screen in this nav graph itself. Similarly, for the settings screen, let's create the settings screens item as well. So we have created yet another item for the settings screens item. I have done nothing different from what I did in the home screen nav graph. Now let's create the nav graph for both of them, starting with the home screen. Similar to before, we create a new nav graph named home nav. It is an extension function to the nav graph builder which contains the detail screen. The navigation method takes in the start destination and then add the different screens as before. In our case, we want the start destination to be the home screen itself. Similar to this, let's also create the settings nav graph as well. Here we add the language screen. Now that we have the nav graphs for the screens ready, we need to inform the main nav host that home and settings screens have a nested navigation, so it needs to be aware of that. So to make the main nav host aware, now instead of referencing the screens, we are now referencing the entire nav graphs for those screens in the main navigation component. Along with this, we also want to change the bottom navigation to reference the graphs inside of the screen. So let's change that as well. So here you can see that I have changed the screen routes to reference the respective graphs instead of the screens themselves. And for the screen routes, I have used the starting screen as the route names for them. That is done because on click of the bottom bar, we navigate to the respective screen. In the main nav controller, we have the nav graphs. Now upon clicking on the home button, the navigation controller navigates to the home screen, which is the starting screen of the home nav graph. So the nav controller loads the home nav graph onto the nav host. So now what I have done is that I have basically passed on the nav controller to the home and the settings nav graph. In the home nav graph, I have also passed down the nav controller to the home and the detail screen. Similarly, in the settings nav graph, I have passed down the nav host controller to the settings and the language screen. I have done this because I want to navigate from the settings screen to the language screen, and in the home screen, I want to navigate from the home screen to the detail screen. So if I go ahead in the settings screen, let's say, in the on-click method of the button, I am simply navigating to the language screen. In here, I am passing the language as the screen route name for the nav host controller, and in the home screen, I am similarly passing in the detailed page screen route name to the navigation controller. Now, if we run the app, we'll see that we are able to now go to the detail screen, come back to the home screen, go to the favorite screen, settings screen, language screen, back, and back to home. So everything is working as expected and we are able to navigate between the different graphs as well.
Hey guys, just a quick pause here. Just want to tell you that if you're interested in learning about the advanced concepts of Jetpack Compose, such as creating our own animations, gestures, views, and layouts, then do check out my course. The link will be in the description box down below. Now, back to the video.
Right. So now that we know about the nested navigation, let's learn about passing the arguments as well. So let's pass in the arguments to the details screen. We are going to pass an ID argument into the details screen, which would be of the integer data type. So as you can see here in the home screen nav graph, I have added a list of arguments for the detailed screen. We have an argument name and the type of the argument that it contains. In our case, that would be an integer. Then in the detail composable, we need to pass the route and the arguments. So here, as you can see that we have created a route. Note that whenever we need to pass in an argument, we pass them in a block. That means the argument name that we have passed in the route parameter of the composable is the placeholder which will be replaced by the actual argument. Remember to keep it inside curly square brackets. Then we pass in the list of arguments which we created in the detail screen object of the home screen items. That is the list of arguments which in our case contains only one item, that is an argument of an integer data type. Finally, we get that argument from the route and pass it onto the details screen. Note that in the details screen, I am now showing the ID that was passed as an argument. So now we have everything in place. We just need to pass in the actual arguments now. So let's do that from the home screen as well. In the home screen, I am doing nothing fancy. I have just included a mutable state of integer value and 3 buttons as for now. So this is the first button with the click state 1, the button with the click state 2, and the button with the click state 3. With each button, I am passing a different integer value as an argument to the detail screen in the same format as we described our detail screen route in. Note that I have changed the ID parameter to use the $sign instead of the curly braces. It was a simple typo that I made. Anyways, let's now jump on to the app. So if I go ahead and build the app, you'll see that I now have 3 detail screen buttons. Now, if I go ahead and click on the screen 1, I'll see that detail screen 1 is being showing up. On the 2, detail screen 2 will show up, and similarly on 3, the detail screen 3 will show up. So now we see that the correct argument is being shown when we click on the respective buttons. So to summarize it, what happened was that we defined an argument name and the type of argument that we were going to take for the detail screen. After that, we create a route that takes in the same arguments. We get that argument from the route and pass it on to the detail screen. The argument parameter in the composable method takes in a list of arguments and then places it as a bundle to the nav backstack for the screen to use. We get those arguments and pass it on to the actual screen. So now that we know about passing the arguments, now let's finally take a look at how we will define a deep link for our app. I want my deep link to open up a respective detailed screen based on the argument. So to do that, the first step is to add the intent filters in the manifest, which is exactly the same what we did in XML layouts as well. So in here you can see that I have added the intent filter along with a data scheme and a host, right? This is exactly the same scenario of what we used to did in the XML layouts as well. After that, we would want to create the deep links for the detail screen. Now, firstly, for the detail screen, we pass in the list of nav deep link along with the URI pattern. So this is the URI pattern that we have decided upon. So that will be the scheme of the app that we defined in the Android manifest. Along with that, I pass in the detailed screen route and the argument that we need to pass in onto the detailed screen. After that, to use the deep links in the detailed screen, we add that into the composable as well. So in here, we first define the URI pattern of the deep link that we want to match. In our case, that is the same route with the arguments. We can pass any argument with the deep link. I have also added the deep links parameter to the composable as well. Now let's test the functionality. We can go to the terminal and run the command to test it. So before testing it, you need to make sure that you have installed the app onto the screen. Now you can go ahead and close it and then open up the terminal. Now you need to make sure that you are exactly at the place where your ADB is located. So in my case, I have my ADB located in the platform tools. Now after that is done, you can go ahead and run this command. This command will basically start the app along with the deep link that we have provided. So in our case, we have provided the argument of 20. So let's test this functionality first. As you can see that now detail screen 20 has been printed onto the screen. Now we can use this command to pass in any argument we want and open up the app using the deep link. So instead of 20, let's use 100 as the argument. And as usual, you can see that now detail screen 100 is being printed onto the screen. That means it is taking the argument value directly from the deep links itself.
So let's keep the video until this point. I hope that you learned something of value in this video. Thank you for watching the video and for your time. We'll meet in another video. Until then, keep contributing code to humanity.